So we were looking at Sidney's Apology for Poetry. Sidney refers to Alexander, who carried Homer with him to the fields, as an example that poetry was always liked by warlike people. Then he gives another example that from Roman history, that Cato misliked Fulvius for carrying Ennius with him to the field. So he is referring here to Cato the censor, who ruled from 239 to 169 BC. And can you see the blackboard?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes, sir.
All right. So here Sidney is referring to Cato the censor, who ruled Rome from 239 to 169 BC. And he criticized Fulvius for carrying with him to the field the poetry by Ennius. He misliked and cried out upon all Greek learning, and yet being 8 years old, began to learn it, belike fearing that Pluto understood not Latin. So this man who did not like literature, did not like poetry, he began to learn Greek at the age of 80 years, fearing that Pluto, the ruler of Hades, won't understand Latin. So here is some humor used by Sidney. Then he confronts the central criticism of criticism against poetry, which is that of Plato's criticism. Now my burden is great. Now Plato's name is laid upon me, whom I must confess of all philosophers I have ever esteemed most worthy of reverence, and with great reason, since of all philosophers he is the most poetical. So this is very brilliant observation by Sidney, that among all philosophers, Plato is the most poetical. So he is most aware of poetical style of writing. Among philosophers, he is the most literary. Yet he will defile the fountain out of which his flowing streams have proceeded. Let us boldly examine with what reasons he did it. First, truly a man might maliciously object that Plato, being a philosopher, was a natural enemy of poets. For indeed, after the philosophers have picked out the sweet mysteries of poetry, the right discerning true points of knowledge, they forthwith putting it in method and making a school out of that which the poets did only teach by divine delightfulness, beginning to spurn at their guides. Like ungrateful prentices, were not content to set up shops for themselves, but sought by all means to discredit their masters. So Sidney says that philosophers learned from the poets the great art of teaching, and then they would defile poetry like ungrateful students going against their masters. Ungrateful apprentices, that is, who learn the trade from their masters, and then they set up shops of their own and try to discredit their masters. So philosophers behaved like enemies of the poets. They learned the art of teaching from the poets, and then they began to discredit them. For indeed the found for Homer 7 cities strove who should have him for their citizen, where many cities banished philosophers as not fit members to live among them. So Homer was invited by 7 cities, whereas it was not infrequent in Greek history that philosophers were banished from the cities as they were considered not good citizens. For only repeating certain of Euripides' verses, many Athenians had their lives saved of the Syracusans, when the Athenians themselves thought many philosophers unworthy to live. So often the verses of poets saved the lives of people, and Sidney gives example from Greek history. Certain poets as Simonides and Pindar had so prevailed with Hiero I that of a tyrant they made him a just king. So poets like Simonides, Pindar, they were very influential, and they could make the tyrant Hiero I a just king. Where Plato could do so little with Dionysius that he himself of a philosopher was made a slave. So Plato could not influence the ruler Dionysius. But who should do thus, I confess, should requite the objections made against poets with like cavilitions against philosophers. As likewise one should do that should one read Phaedrus or Symposium in Plato, or the Discourse of Love in Plutarch, and see whether any poet do authorize abominable filthiness as they do. So philosophers often criticize poets, but likewise cannot be seen among poets. We do not see poets writing against the philosophers. And as good examples of poetry where one does not find any abomination or any authorization of abomination, Sidney says that we hardly find that in poetry, whereas we find that in philosophy. So by abominable filthiness, Sidney here is referring to homosexuality, and says that in Phaedrus or Symposium, or even in Plutarch's Discourse on Love, we find support of homosexuality, which Sidney looks upon as an abomination, which was the contemporary attitude in Sidney's time, and says that unlike the writings of Plutarch or Plato, we do not find anything in favor of homosexuality in poetry. Again, a man might ask out of what commonwealth Plato did banish them. In sooth, thence where he himself alloweth community of women. So Sidney says that the commonwealth which Plato imagined, there he allowed a community of women, that is, communal use of women. In the Republic, Plato suggests that women may be held in common and there is no need of any kind of marriage relationship, but for the purpose of reproduction, women may be used in common by the men. So Sidney says that this is definitely immoral, and therefore from such an immoral commonwealth, Plato is banishing the poets. So it does not matter. Why should poets be in an immoral commonwealth? Then Sidney gives the testimony of St. Paul's. So citing of authority is important in Renaissance oration. Sidney gives the testimony of St. Paul, who praises the poets in his writings, which are known as Acts. St. Paul himself, who yet for the credit of poets, alleged twice two poets, and one of them by the name of a prophet, setteth a watchword upon philosophy, indeed upon the abuse. Not upon, so doth Plato upon the abuse, not upon poetry. So Sidney says here that St. Paul in the Acts warns against the abuse of philosophy. Similarly, Plato in the Republic warns against the abuse of poetry. So, Sidney's argument here is that we should not misread Plato. Plato is not against poetry, but he is against the abuse of poetry. Plato found fault that the poets of his time filled the world with wrong opinions of the gods, making light tales of that unspotted essence, and therefore would not have the youth depraved with such opinions. Herein may much be said, let this suffice, the poets did not induce such opinions, but did imitate those opinions already induced. For all the Greek stories can well testify that the very religion of that time stood upon many and many fashioned gods. So, Sidney's point here is that Greek religion or pagan religion was polytheistic. Because they worshipped many gods. So already in Greek mythology or Greek religion, there was this corruption of polytheism, which from the perspective of Protestant Christian like Philip Sidney is a corruption or falsehood. Therefore, Sidney's point is that the Greek culture was already, full of falsehood and corruption, and the poets only followed or drew from those resources where already the gods were many and not all of them were depicted as very virtuous. Therefore, it is not the fault of the poets. Who list may read in Plutarch the discourses of Isis and Osiris, of the cause why oracles ceased, of the divine providence, and see whether the theology of that nation stood not upon such dreams which the poets indeed superstitiously observed. So, the discourses by Plutarch on Isis and Osiris, that is the religious discussion, where Plutarch explains why oracles ceased. So Sidney here is raising a theological argument that Greek religion and Greek gods, they were already being described as false and corrupt, and therefore the poets only drew from those descriptions. Who list may read. List means who wants. So if you want, Sidney says, you read Plutarch, and there you will find this description of this theological point, this argument that the gods were already considered as many and not perfect. So he is arguing that Greek religion or pagan religion was corrupt and superstitious and did not show gods in a good light. So he writes that if you read Plutarch's discourse, see whether the theology of the nation stood not upon such dreams which the poets indeed superstitiously observed, and truly, since they had not the light of Christ, did much better in it than the philosophers, who, shaking off superstition, brought in atheism. So the ultimate development in Greek religion was that because of the corrupt situation of religion, the philosophers altogether shook off religion. That is, they abandoned religion or faith in God and moved towards atheism. And Sidney says that why did the Greeks make such mistakes in the matter of religion? Why did they think that there were many gods or the gods were not all moral and so on? Because they did not have the light of Christianity. So here we see again a Renaissance attempt of apologizing for the pagan faults of pagan worldview. You know that the Renaissance was possible because of the rediscovery of Greek literature and philosophy. But Greek literature and philosophy also contained the pagan worldview. Therefore, it was important for the writers in the Renaissance to reconcile pagan worldview with the Christian worldview. Thus, Sidney's argument here is that the Greeks make mistake because they did not have the light of Christianity, and they were still pagan, and that is why their theology was wrong, their idea about gods was wrong. But when the poets described the gods, they did it better than the philosophers, because the philosophers became atheists. The poets at least described the gods better than them. Plato, therefore, whose authority I had much rather justly construe than unjustly resist, meant not in general of poets in those words of which Julius Scaliger said. Then there is this Latin sentence, Quo authoritate barbari quidam atque spidi abuti velint, at poetas e republica exigendos. This means, and this authority certain uncouth and barbarous writers would like to misuse for the purpose of driving poets out of the Republic. So this is from Scaliger, the French neoclassical critic. So maybe I should write the meaning of the sentence. And this authority certain uncouth and barbarous writers and this authority certain uncouth and barbarous writers would like to misuse for the purpose of driving poets out of the Republic. This is a quotation from Scaliger's Poetics. So you see, before Sidney, Scaliger was already trying to defend poetry in his Poetics, and Sidney is just borrowing this argument for Scaliger that the authority of the pagan theology, the pagan theological argument is used by barbarous writers, so that it is misused by them, so that the poets are driven out of the Republic. So, by using the testimony of Scaliger, Sidney makes it clear that the poets are not responsible, or poetry is not responsible, but the misuse of the art. It is the misuse of the art which led to Plato's charge that poetry has become corrupt. But only mean to drive out those wrong opinions of the deity, whereof now without further law Christianity has taken away all the hurtful belief, perchance nourished by the then esteemed poets. So the purpose was, Sidney says, to drive out the wrong opinions of God. So the purpose of Plato's banishing the poets was to banish not poetry in general, but only the wrong opinions or wrong theological opinions. Therefore, Sidney's point here is that Plato's banishment of poets from the Republic is not a blanket banishment of poetry, but it was a banishment only of wrong theological opinions. Is it clear? And then he says that the fact that Plato highly esteemed poets can be seen by reading his dialogue Ion, where he praises the poets. So you should not form your opinion about Plato's point of view only by reading the Republic, but in the dialogue Ion, Plato highly praises the poets. For indeed I had much rather show their mistaking of Plato than go about to overthrow his authority. Whom the wiser a man is, the more just cause he shall find to have in admiration, especially since he attributed unto poesy more than myself do, namely, to be a very inspiring of a divine force, far above man's wit, as in the aforenamed dialogue is apparent. So in Ion, Plato says that poetry is inspiring. So, what does inspiration in this context mean? You know that the translation of inspiration in Greek was entheosmos, which in English is enthusiasm. That is, God enters into the poet, or the spirit of gods enters in the poet and speaks through him. Therefore, Plato's idea of poetry in Ion is highly appreciative of the divine nature of poetry, because poetry is inspired by God or by spirit. Am I clear? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Tell me if you do not understand anything. Then he gives some testimonies favoring poetry. That is, testimonies in favor of poetry. So the refutation part is over. He defended or refuted all the charges brought against poetry. Now he finds some testimonies, that is what other people have said, which are in favor of poetry. The judgment, different judgments, best sort of judgments granted to the poets. A whole sea of examples would present themselves. Alexander, Caesar, Scipios, all favorers of poets. Laelius called the Roman Socrates, himself a poet, so as part of a Heutonti Merumenus in Terence was supposed to be made by him. So Laelius collaborated with, Laelius was also the ruler, but he was also a wise man, so he was called the Roman Socrates. He collaborated with Terence in writing of the play Heutonti Merumenus. And even the Greek Socrates, whom Apollo confirmed to be the only wise man, is said to have spent part of his old time in putting Aesop's fables into verses. But we do not have any writings by Socrates. Everything that we know about Socrates comes either from Plato or from Xenophon. So Sidney says that Socrates versified Aesop's fables. So Aesop, the writer of those fables which were in prose, Socrates put them into verse, by which Sidney tries to prove that great rulers and wise men like Socrates or Laelius, they all favor poetry. And who reads Plutarch's either history or philosophy? But what need more? Aristotle writes the art of poesy, and why, if it should not be written? So Aristotle, another wise man, he also writes the poetics. Sidney calls it the art of poesy, but Sidney is actually referring to Aristotle's poetics. So if poetry were not important, then why should Aristotle write a book on it? So since he wrote it, so it proves that poetry was favored by him. Plutarch teaches the use to be gathered of them, and how if they should not read. And who reads Plutarch's either history or philosophy shall find he trimmeth both their garments with guards of poesy. So Plutarch also highly praises poetry. He said that the lines from poetry should be gathered or collected, and though he is a writer of history and philosophy, but he uses insights from poetry. He uses poetry as his guide in writing history or philosophy. but Sidney says that I will not defend poetry with the help of her underlying historiography. So writing of history is below poetry. So Sidney calls it an underling. So I will not praise poetry, which is much superior than history, by the example of history. Then he sums up the refutation, all this refutation of Plato's charge and other charges against poetry, so that since the excellencies of it may be easily and so justly confirmed, and the low creeping objections so soon trodden down, it not being an art of lies but of true doctrine. So poetry is not an art of lies, but it is a true doctrine. Thus, Sidney has successfully refuted the charge of falsehood against poetry. True doctrine, that is something which teaches us truth. Not of effeminateness but of notable stirring of courage. So Sidney earlier gave the example how all heroes, warlike heroes or soldiers like Alexander, they all liked poetry, and not of abusing man's wit but of strengthening man's wit, not banished but honored by Plato. Okay. So thus he concludes that he has refuted all the charges brought against poetry. I see that today your attendance is very low. I do not know the reason. Then the next part is a digression where Sidney is talking about poetry in England, the status of poetry in England, and why in England poetry is in low repute. How can I but exclaim, Musa, mihi posas memora, o numine leso, quoting from Virgil's the Aeneid. Sweet poetry that hath anciently had kings, emperors, senators, great captains, such as beside 1,000 others, David, Adrian, Sophocles, Germanicus, not only to favor poets but to be poets, and of our nearer times can present for our patrons a Robert, King of Sicily, the great King Francis of France, King James of Scotland, such cardinals as Bembo and Bibiena, such famous preachers and teachers as Beza and Melanchthon. So Sidney gives examples from all professions, kings and rulers, cardinals, religious rulers, learned men, teachers, philosophers like Fracastoro and Scaliger. So Sidney says that there is no lack of people of all noble professions who love poetry or who favor poetry. Orators like Pontanus and Muretus, witty writers like George Buchanan, and so on. I say these with numbers of others, not only to read others' poeses but to poetize for others' reading. That poesy, thus embraced in all other places, should only find in our time a hard welcome in England. I think the very earth lamented it, and therefore decked our soil with fewer laurels than it was accustomed. So the meaning of this is that Sidney laments the dearth of good poets in England. For heretofore, poets have in England also flourished, and which is to be noted even in those times when the trumpet of Mars did sound loudest, that is, when people were more warlike, even then poetry flourished, and now that an overtrained quietness should seem to strew the house for poets, they are almost in as good reputation as the mountebanks at Venice. So, Sidney says that even when it was troubled times, even then in England poetry was favoured, but now that here is peace in England, how come that in such a peaceful situation the reputation of poetry is no better than that of the mountebanks in Venice? The mountebanks in Venice were notorious cheaters. So there are many comedies on the mountebanks. Truly, even that as of the one side, it giveth great praise to poesy, which like Venus hath rather to be troubled in the net with Mars than enjoy the homely quiet of Vulcan. So serves it for a piece of reason why they are less grateful to idle England, which now can scarce endure the pain of the pen. So Sidney says that in England now the spirit is lacking, the spirit of poetry is lacking. Upon this necessarily followeth that base men with servile wits undertake it, who think it enough if they can be rewarded of the printer. So now serious or talented people, they do not take up writing of poetry, but base people or people who have no qualities, they are writing poetry, and that is why inferior poetry is being produced. For now, as if all the muses were got with child to bring forth bastard poets, without any commission they do post over the banks of Helicon till they make the readers more weary than post horses. So the muses, they are now producing bastard poets, which means that illegitimate children, illegitimate poets who lack talent, and by writing inferior poetry they make the readers more tired than post horses, that is, horses who travel from one post to another. Vis meliore lutopping sit Pregordia Titan, whose souls informing better play Prometheus has shaped. That is, the better poets, they are better content to suppress the outflowing of their wit than by publishing them to be accounted knights of the same order. So the qualified or more talented poets, they are suppressing their spirit and they are not writing poetry. The third cause is that the present poets, they are not born poets. So can everybody be a poet? Is there Sudarshan in this class? I don't think so. Sudarshan ache? Right. So can everybody be a poet? Of course not. So there is this idea that poets are born poets. That is, either they are born with that talent or they cannot be poets. One cannot so much learn the art of poetry like other crafts. One may learn versification, but one cannot learn to be a poet. So these are the three causes that Sidney provides. First cause, lack of spirit. The second cause, poets are inferior. Now inferior people are writing poetry. The third cause is that true poets, they are suppressing themselves and those who are writing, they are not born poets. And the fourth cause, lack of training and practice. Yet confess I always that as the fertilest ground must be manured, so must the highest flying wheat have a Daedalus to guide him. That Daedalus, they say, both in this and in other, hath 3 wings to bear itself up into the air of due commendation. So, in poetry also, only talent is not enough. So there must be hard work and practice or training, and Sidney refers to the myth of Daedalus, who had invented the wings with which, the waxen wings with which he could fly out of the labyrinth. So Sidney says that the 3 wings of Daedalus are art, imitation and exercise. Art, imitation, and exercise. And this Sidney probably borrows from the well-known book on rhetoric, Ad Herennium. Written by Pseudo Cicero. For a long time it was believed that this book was written by Cicero, but later it has been proved not to be the work of Cicero, so some other author. Then he says, these neither artificial rules nor imitative patterns we much cumber ourselves with them. Exercise indeed we do, but that very far backwardly, for where we should exercise to know, we exercise as having known. And so is our brain delivered of much matter, which never was begotten by knowledge. So, Sidney says that we should develop our practice of more exercise, because only rules and patterns cannot help in creating art. But we do it for backwardly, that is, we first exercise and then learn. But one should first learn and then exercise. For there being 2 principal parts, matter to be expressed by words and words to express the matter, in neither we use art or imitation rightly. Our matter is Codlivet, indeed, though wrongly performing Ovid's verse, qui quid conabar dicere versus erat. Codlivet means scholastic argument. This line from Ovid means, and whatever I tried to say turned into verse. So, never marshalling it into an absolute rank that almost the readers cannot tell where to find themselves. In other words, Sidney suggests that we should develop inductive thinking, and we should train ourselves to arrange marshal means to arrange words in a proper manner, and so that the readers know what is the meaning of our expression. And Sidney here talks about the matter to be expressed by words and words to express the matter. That is the two aspects of reality, words and matter. So the matter or the world that a poet sees, that world or that matter must be expressed through words. So in Latin, matter is res and words means verba. Verbum, plural verba. But the number of words is always less compared to the matter in this world. So words can never be sufficient or apt to express all matters. So this was a well-known common problem in the Renaissance, about which Erasmus also writes in his book De Copia. Erasmus, the name of Erasmus's book, in brief, it is called De Copia. Copia means fullness, plenty. But the full title of Erasmus's book was De Duplici Copia. Copia Verborum ac rerum. It is of the double copia of words and things. Okay, so this dichotomy between words and things, res and verba, Erasmus talks about this problem in his book De Duplici Copia Verborum ac rerum. Then he gives the examples of English literature before him. Chaucer was a great poet, Sackville, Surrey, Spenser, and so on. And then he goes on to talk about tragedies and comedies. We will look at this section in the next class, and after that he makes some comments on love poetry, some comments on the Ciceronian style, and more or less with that this oration comes to an end. So I will stop here. If you have any questions, you can ask.